Good morning, afternoon, or evening, ladies and gentlemen, depending on your time zone. This is another short video by myself on my YouTube channel where I wanted to talk very briefly about morality and where morality comes from, because that's a big question. What is the ultimate source of morality, of the standard behind right and wrong? And I thought of contrasting two philosophies from two different philosophers or philosophical traditions. One is Immanuel Kant, a German philosopher. I wonder in I wonder if you pronounce his name Immanuel Kant in American English, but I'm not fully sure. In Norwegian, you would just say Immanuel Kant. He was a very influential late 1700s German philosopher, and he believed or articulated the view that morality comes from within yourself. Essentially, it is the moral law is something that is self-given by the person, by the moral agent, or it's something that gives itself. It's something that you give yourself through your reason. So Kant would say morality, the moral law, does not come from anything outside of yourself. It doesn't come from God, it doesn't come from society or your parents or anything else outside of just purely your reason. Meaning that the motive for your action, the reason why you act morally, should solely be that there is a moral law you discover through reason and that you bind yourself to it. And so for him to say that I follow the moral law because I want to go to heaven or I want to please God, that is not a good reason to be moral. You need to do the right things solely because it's part of the moral law that you somehow give yourself or discover through reason. So that's Immanuel Kant's view. But I would maintain that morality does come from God and it is discovered through the natural law, as well as something called divine positive law. And that is something we discover from St. Thomas Aquinas, the great Catholic philosopher, and the scholastic Catholic tradition. So, from this perspective, morality is ultimately based upon the eternal law of God, which has to do with the final purpose or goal or end of things in creation, what things are ordered towards as their end. So it has to do with function. What is the purpose of human existence? What is the purpose of this and that? That is derived from the eternal law of God, the right order, you could say, of reality. At least that's how I understand it. And then derived from that, you have the natural law, which is the law about, you could say, human nature. It's the law that says that human beings have a certain nature and certain natural ends, meaning that there is something our natural that we are naturally ordered towards as our end. And to understand this idea of ordering or purpose better, you could look at things like the eye. An eye, the purpose of an eye or the end of an eye is to see. The end of a heart is to pump blood. The end of lungs is, to be able to breathe and so forth. All of those have functions. Have inbuilt purposes. They're supposed to do those things. An apple tree is supposed to bear apple, as apples as its fruit. And so, from this perspective, a moral person is someone who obeys the natural law, meaning he does what his nature is ordered towards. So, for example, he eats food because his body is ordered towards nourishment. He drinks water because his body is ordered towards hydration. He lives in peace and harmony with his neighbors, with society, because his nature is ordered towards a peaceful, flourishing existence, not one with chaos and violence or going to prison or hatred and so forth. He's ordered towards being honest because his faculty of speech, the purpose of that is to communicate truth to others. So if you lie, you are abusing your faculty of communication against its purpose. That's why it's immoral. It's wrong to steal, it's wrong to kill an innocent person, and so forth, because those are against the natural law. And that natural law, again, is based on the eternal law of God, because God is the author of nature. Everything in creation comes back to him. Now, obviously, someone who doesn't believe in God, an atheist or an agnostic, would not hold this view. But then we can get into arguments for why God exists. But the point I'm getting at here is that Kant's view that morality has to be internally given, it doesn't have to be followed. There is an alternative way of looking at this that we could subscribe to instead, that I would subscribe to and argue for. And as for Kant's critique that, well, if you do something just because God tells you to, it's not really morality, I would say actually it is, because God himself is pure goodness. To follow God and to follow moral goodness means more than the same thing, because God is by its very nature goodness itself. So to follow God means to follow goodness. And so it's not arbitrary. You're not following God because there is some arbitrary preference. You follow God because God, by definition, is the supreme being who is supposed to be followed, right? So it makes perfect sense. And also, to be moral, you can still do something with the motivation to want to go to heaven, because what is going on in heaven? Well, in heaven you are with God eternally. And God, again, is goodness itself. In heaven you would be fulfilled in your human nature in a supernatural way. And therefore, it's not at the expense of moral goodness. It is a way to fulfill your moral agency, in a sense. So Kant's view that you have to view morality and something external like God in competition with each other, that doesn't have to be followed. And so I would say Kant was wrong, and the view of St. Thomas Aquinas, the Catholic philosophical view, Aristotle, that makes sense. So, and by the way, even atheists can agree that there is a natural law that people ought to follow. Even atheists can recognize that things have function. The heart, the eye, the ear, the digestive system, they're all ordered towards a certain end. And a human being, by its nature, is ordered towards an end, human flourishing. And even an atheist can recognize that we human beings, having free will, having the capacity to choose between different courses of action, we can choose to fulfill our natural end or go against it. And morality, it follows, is about doing what our free will is supposed to do, namely to realize or actualize that natural potential of the human person to fulfill this end. So it's sort of abstract, but that is essentially what I would say about the matter. So that's basically it. Those are a few thoughts I would like to share, or I wanted to share, about moral philosophy and contrasting Kant with the Aristotelian or Thomistic Catholic view. So that was essentially it, and I hope you're all having a pleasant morning, evening, afternoon, or night.